Would moving the Denver Broncos stadium out of the downtown area actually tarnish one of the NFL's better legacy brands? When it comes to a new stadium, should it be an open air facility? Should it be a retractable roof? Or should the Broncos join a trend of many NFL teams of creating an entirely encapsulated dome structure, potentially opening up possibilities for other major sporting events to be hosted here in the Mile High City? Plus, we have another special guest to help us continue our winding down of the 30 biggest storylines in our Mile High Milestone series in celebration of 30 years of Denver Sports 1043 The Fan. All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin in the NFL with a trigger warning because this particular topic seems to bring out some of the most passion, vitriol, and emotion out of Broncos country compared to almost any topic or storyline I've seen in the last maybe half decade or so. And that's saying something, given what we've seen and experienced here in Broncos country during that time. And that topic is the concept of building a new stadium for the Denver Broncos, and most importantly, where that stadium should be located. The reason this has come up again is because at the NFL owners' meetings, where the collection of NFL owners and coaches and executives, et cetera, are gathered in Florida to have their annual spring meetings where they discuss things from rule changes to stadium and renovation plans and the like before the season gets going. And Greg Penner, the majority acting owner for the Denver Broncos, who by and large has done a phenomenal job since taking over the team just last season, is 2 seasons ago, is being asked again what the plan is for the Denver Broncos where it relates to their stadium. And he had this to say, quote, "We haven't ruled anything out. We're still looking at the current site, other sites around Denver, Lone Tree, Aurora. We don't have a set timetable for making a decision." So that's kind of similar to the answers that he's given up to this point. But the reality is a decision seems to be coming here sooner rather than later. It was first brought up a handful of months ago when our own Mike Kliss, contributor, friend of the station, and kind of the lead sports guy for 9 News, put out there the initial name of Lone Tree as a destination if the Broncos were to move the stadium outside of that downtown area that they currently have it, which has drawn, even though it's been the classic location, has drawn some discontent or dislike from a certain section of the fan base because of the lack of other stuff around there and just the overall quality of the area in that specific portion of the city. Lone Tree, by way of Kliss, who got it by way of the Penner ownership group, was listed as the first potential option. And even though it's probably not, when I think of Lone Tree, I think of Park Meadows Mall. And while it's probably not in that area could extend all the way out to, closer to Ridgegate, where the Cabela's is and all of that, where there's a little bit more open land and open space. So significantly further south, I would say, of where its current location is, probably 20-ish miles. And now we've heard another name that I just referenced in Greg Penner's quote, which is Aurora. Now, there is the Santa Fe rail yard situation where if they wanted to keep it closer to the Denver area, the metro area where it currently is, that is the option as well. So you've got your 3 cities, it seems, which have come into place in other part of Denver, Aurora, and Lone Tree. So I guess the question that I want to ask all of you is, which of those 3 locations would you prefer if the stadium has to be moved and built anew? And the other question, which conveniently also has 3 options, is with that new stadium, called it Empower Field or something else, open air, which it currently is, the current rendition of Empower Field is, retractable roof, which we've seen at other stadiums like Mercedes-Benz and Jerry World and others, or fully enclosed dome, something that is not open and closable based on the season, but just like a retractable roof, carries the advantage of being open for the hosting and the site city of major events like the Super Bowl, like the Final Four, like the World Cup. And we've seen Denver be flirted with for some of those earlier or lesser round events in the past, but they just don't seem like they're going to get the options as a city to be able to host those major events like we see in Phoenix and San Antonio and Minneapolis and New York and the like all the time because of their weather and the climate around that time of year and the lack of infrastructure in a stadium that would be able to counteract some of those things like weather. So Denver, Lone Tree, Aurora, open air, retractable roof, full dome. I will tell you my personal preference is I'm not crazy picky on the location, but I am also not opposed to them moving the stadium out of Denver. And I know that that draws the ire of a lot of Broncos fans, especially the season ticket holder ilk who have been loyal and faithful to that team for a long time. But I mainly feel that way because I don't see the moving of the stadium out of downtown as a slight or a disrespect to that particular fan base, if you catch my drift. I don't think that this ownership group, who has done nothing but inject life and money and success back into this Broncos franchise, defibrillated it essentially after 7, 8, almost a decade of mediocrity and sometimes even lower than that. And they, being the amassed group of billionaires and a wealth conglomerate that they are not going to just accept the terms of what is because they have to based on some unwritten code or moral rule or what have you. They are paying rent on a lot, and the rent that they are paying is probably not worth the product that they are currently paying it for. So if they're going to spend all this money, and especially if they're, even if they don't, but especially if they're going to do it without the use of taxpayer funds and all of that, which is another hotly contested topic that kind of folds into this conversation, why should they be forced to pay to do all of that in a location that they don't like, that makes it more difficult for them to be able to get the return on investment that they are entitled to as the investees? You know, as the investors, the people who are making the move, why should they be forced to dampen that based on the feelings of people who don't have as much skin in the game? And I know that comes across a little insensitive, but I don't think it is, because I'm trying not to have feelings get swept up into the decision-making process. If they were to move the stadium down to Lone Tree, out east to Aurora, or even, I guess, I suppose, to a different part of Denver, as long as it allows them to do the things that they want to do, to build a compound or a complex around it that features hotels and shops and restaurants and bars and nightclubs and really whatever variety of things that you want to put around it, condominiums and apartments and things of that nature, building a complex around this stadium that turns it into a year-round entertainment venue that is to a greater degree than it currently is. I don't know why that's a net negative, especially considering that the majority of the fans who currently travel to go to Broncos home games come from outside the city of Denver. They already do. So in some ways, to a certain portion of the fan base, or a portion of the majority of fans, this is actually moving the stadium closer to them. And you can talk about the traffic here and the traffic there, because that, when there was a proposal to move it out toward the Gaylord out there in the DIA wasteland, which Denver International Airport, by the way, not located in Denver, but we're okay with that. That doesn't matter. When there was the conversation about moving it out to the Gaylord, it was all about the traffic is going to be too hard getting in and out of there. Traffic on I-25 already sucks. It already does. There's no need or no benefit to moving it in a different place, because no matter where you go on a Broncos game day, the traffic is going to suck. Whether it's commuters coming from Castle Rock, coming down from Thornton or Longmont or Superior, coming west from Aurora, coming east from Lakewood or what have you, it's going to be the same. So I feel like we're using these things as crutches or as tropes to something that's already happening and isn't going to be made worse by the current situation. And then on the subject of open air, retractable roof, or dome, I think, again, this goes back to if I'm the Walton Penner ownership group and I'm going to invest, excuse me, all this money into building a new state-of-the-art facility and a new stadium, why then am I going to do it in a way that does not allow me to maximize that investment, which is what the open air stadium does? Yes, I know that there is a part of being a Broncos fan thus far that has meant open air games and using the weather as your an advantage, in addition with the altitude, playing in the snow and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, those things are not integral or vital to being a Broncos fan, to a fan experience at a Broncos game. They're just not. And having a retractable roof, having an enclosed dome as the facility where your team plays, the fact that it opens up all those other options and all the other things that would allow Broncos fans and fans in the community to do, why is that worth sacrificing just to keep things the way that they are? I understand that I'm not trying to be anti-tradition or, sound like one of those cursed out-of-towners that comes in and just ruins the lives of all of the native Coloradans. But I genuinely feel and believe that this shouldn't be as crazy and hotly contested of a conversation as it seems to become. And to those who say, well, they're the Denver Broncos, so they should stay in Denver. They're not the Lone Tree Broncos or the Aurora Broncos. That's great. I guess my question to you would be, what about all the other teams that are already doing this? Just ask the Inglewood Rams or Chargers. How about the Orchard Park Bills? The East Rutherford New York Giants or New York Jets, the Miami Gardens Dolphins, Santa Clara 49ers, Arlington Cowboys, Landover Commanders. Why is it that these cities have managed to do it without any kind of discourse, but it's impossible to think that it should happen in Denver? All right, I want to bring in, as a transitionary way into this conversation, I want to bring in Zach By, who is the co-host of The Drive with Zach By and Philip Lindsay, Monday through Friday from 2 to 6. And Zach, I want to bring you in a smidge early before we kick in our Mile High Milestones conversation, because you are an avid fan of one of the teams that I just mentioned. So Zach, when you think about your experience growing up a fan of the Orchard Park Bills, and you are looking at the fact that they don't play in Buffalo, has that, in your eyes, dampened or diminished the experience of fans in the Buffalo community? And what does that potentially mean for fans here in Denver who may be experiencing some of those same feelings right now?
Well, I would say that in the case of the Bills, they've played in Orchard Park for decades and decades. So it's really something that doesn't even get discussed or mentioned like at all. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think I've ever even heard the conversation. And I'm being literal. I've never heard the conversation of, hey, the stadium needs to be in Buffalo, 7, 8 miles away from Orchard Park. But in this case, you would be removing it from a current location to a new location. So I certainly understand, and I try to be as delicate as possible, like you just were, with people who are very passionate that the Denver Broncos should play in Denver. But I would venture to say all those examples that you just listed, which feels like half the league, I think once it's done, and that's just the way things are, the talking point evaporates. And that would be my guess here. For individuals maybe who had an axe to grind, maybe they would continue to do that moving forward on social media here and there. But as one texter said, hey, anyone who wants to give up their tickets, their season tickets, there's 30,000 people behind them. And I would love to grab those tickets because of how upset you are that it's no longer in Denver. So again, it's delicate, it's tradition. The stadium downtown is a part of the fabric of the community. You just have to ask the question from the lens of Greg Penner. Does it make sense for the wealthiest owner in the richest sport of them all continue to pay rent on a plot of land that he doesn't own? And that would buck against every current trend in the NFL, or really across, whether you look at Major League Baseball and the Battery in Atlanta, or these districts around some of our basketball stadiums, like in Milwaukee, the Deer District. So every new trend is to build a stadium district around it, and hard, I think, for some people who haven't experienced what that's like and what that feels like, and leaving a game and instead of transitioning to your car or to have another beer in the parking lot, to go into a one of 8, 9, 10 bars, a restaurant, a steakhouse, do your grocery shopping at a Target, or maybe in this case, a Walmart after the game. It's my experience in Foxborough really recalibrated my stance on this. And I do think that's the direction that this is going, because, Richie, quite frankly, this is the direction of almost all new builds in 2025.
Correct. And I share the sentiment about Foxborough. You and me and Phil were able to see that together for Army Navy. And I agree with you. It was so different and eye-opening compared to what we've experienced here in Denver. And I also think, to your point about the trend of the way that it's going, I also think that some of the people who are upset, and justifiably, because emotion gets folded into these things, but if the people, a lot of them were put in that same position to lay out the parameters that you just said, as the primary owner of the team, who's putting up billions of dollars in primary stake money to be able to make this thing. But then you have to do it while also acknowledging that you should, because of morals or feelings, take less return on your investment, or put yourself in a situation where you're paying rent in an area that's not worth it, or you're doing this or you're doing that. I think a lot of us would act the same way if it was our money and our pocketbooks on the line for the construction project.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense financially. So yes, just supplement what you just said. It literally doesn't make any sense, big picture, financially, over the next 40 years to keep the stadium where it is.
Last thing before we transition to the Mile High Milestones things, on the subject of, because I the way I framed it is, there's kind of like two categories when it comes to this stadium discussion, and they both have three options. There's Denver, Lone Tree, and Aurora, and then there's open air, retractable roof, full dome. And I think that for the same parameters that we've just been laying out about, like, if you're going to spend billions, north of $1 billion, and do all of this work to move a stadium, to build a brand new complex and the surrounding areas around it, to do so, but then not design the stadium to be as multi-use as possible, to create a year-round entertainment venue, which is what lends itself to a retractable roof or full dome scenario, seems illogical from a business sense, which makes me think that that would be the direction that they would go. If the Broncos were to go to a retractable roof situation or a full dome situation, do you think that would dampen the overall experience of going to Broncos games, as someone who's been here in the city for almost a decade now?
Yeah, I don't think it would dampen it. It would just be a reprised look on what already is. I mean, with the retractable roof, you obviously give yourself options that you're able to enjoy those beautiful days in the fall and even early winter here in Colorado, but close it up. Maybe, and Richie, maybe they keep it open for every single Broncos game. And then they just close it for concerts.
Sure.
And the Final Four and WrestleMania and Taylor Swift. So, I think that I would prefer that option, just because it's kind of a Swiss Army knife of an arena. I do understand fans who do not want to go to a full-time dome. I totally get it. There's also this hybrid option that we're seeing in Buffalo and a couple other places, where it's a bit of a halo, where the crowd is covered up, but if the elements are coming down, it's still there on the playing surface. That might be a middle ground, but my thought is, and you were kind of hinting at it, if you have the wealth and the resources of the Walton Penner family ownership group, and they've shown no signs of sparing an expense in any instance here since they got here 2.5, 3 years ago, I could see them going with this option. There's functionality questions, and hey, sometimes they don't work right. I think they'd be able to figure it out. I think that a retractable roof is the most logical way to go, because you can make it exactly what you want it to be on that particular day. And if you're starting all over, what's another $800 million on top of a $4 billion stadium to do it the right way, the quote unquote right way, in this case being the retractable roof?
I couldn't agree more. I think the Walton Penner family ownership group has done nothing but inject life and money and winning back into the franchise since they've taken it over just a number of years ago. And they have earned my trust to be able to steer this ship, to continue to steer this ship in the direction that they want, even if it means building a retractable roof or a dome in a city that is not in the downtown area like it currently is. And I'm willing to take them on that ride because of the work they've put in on the front end thus far. Okay, it is time to transition into our Mile High Milestones countdown presented by your local Ford dealers. We have been diligently counting down 30 of the biggest storylines in Colorado sports over the last 30 years in celebration of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan's 30th anniversary on the air. And we have now officially cracked the top 10. We are on to number 9, one that I think was the beginning of a very significant franchise shift for one of our hometown teams in the Denver Nuggets, and that is milestone number 9, Nikola Jokic winning his first MVP award. And Zach, this happened in the 2020-2021 season, right on the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic and the craziness that resulted out of that across the landscape of professional sports. What do you remember about looking back on the early rumblings of this post-COVID shortened season and the Nuggets just coming off of a Western Conference Finals appearance against the Lakers heading into this new year?
Yeah, I remember it being like, how are the Nuggets still in the 3 seed without Jamal Murray? How did they go 12-3 without Jamal Murray? And Jokic just putting the team on his back. I mean, the year before he won this MVP, Jokic wasn't scoring quite 20 points a game yet. And then that season, he's 26.5 points. His rebounds jumped to a career high. His assists jumped to a career high. It was almost like he accepted the burden of Jamal not being there, and it was sensational. I mean, it was one of these things where for the Nuggets, and this is going to come across as almost the wrong way, but if you rewind to 5 years ago, the Denver Nuggets had not ever been in the finals. They never had an MVP. Even a player as great as Carmelo Anthony was, Carmelo Anthony never attained first team All-NBA. So in a lot of ways, while acknowledging some of the great players that have came through this franchise, it legitimized a team who had been widely considered a flyover city. And it was a new king had been crowned. Really, up until that point, people would still argue that Carmelo Anthony or some of the great players of the past deserve that label of greatest player in Denver Nuggets history. But at the end of that season, when he won that MVP in the landslide fashion in which it fell, where Jokic garnered 91 of the 101 first place votes, it wasn't even close. It was a complete landslide. And it just sort of, in a roundabout, indirect way, it legitimized the franchise that is the Denver Nuggets. And ultimately, the last layer that was appearing in the finals and winning the championship. But it also ended the conversation of who the greatest Denver Nugget of all time was. It wasn't going to be David Thompson or Dan Issel or Carmelo Anthony or fill in the blank great player, Dikembe Mutombo. There's been a handful, but none that got close to winning an MVP. And I think that it sort of established Jokic as a bit of like Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore. He wasn't the first great Nuggets player like a George Washington, but he was something that was just completely different in the history of this organization.
That was going to actually be my next question, because I agree with you. I think that this was the signifying moment where Jokic became the greatest Nugget of all time. He was the third NBA player in history behind Oscar Robertson and Russell Westbrook to average 26, 10, and 8 on a season. He had a 50-10 game against the Sacramento Kings that year, which was the first time since 1975 with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He led the team to a top 3 seed in the West, and you mentioned the landslide in the voting. But I think what it also legitimized was a significant shift in the way that people, voter and fan, analyst and media member alike, were forced to look at the NBA and the game of basketball through the lens of Nikola Jokic, because he at this time was still is the anti-NBA superstar. His game is not built on high-flying athleticism or SportsCenter top 10 worthy plays, or it wasn't as much, I should say, at this time. And he is not what if you were to close your eyes and imagine what the face of the NBA looks like, Nikola Jokic's portrait is probably pretty far down, maybe on a lot of fans' minds. But this MVP season and the unanimous nature with which he kind of forced the issue and has continued to do, this kind of felt like the first tip of the spear breaking through and changing people's minds about the way he should be looked at in the NBA circle.
Yeah, because I think I co-sign that, because up until the MVP season, there had been a lot of but. And the
Mm-hmm.
way that Jokic skins his basketball cat is very different, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe for some people less digestible than the high-flying, slam-dunking, crossing over uber athlete that's going to be on the front cover of a magazine or video game. Now, that's not to say Jokic's game doesn't have flash. It has a lot of flash. It's just a different brand of flash, and took some getting accustomed to for not even just the NBA universe, but a lot of the NBA players as well. Jokic, when he would go to the All-Star game, just sort of stuck out almost like a kid from a different school who was asked to come into a new cafeteria. It didn't feel right at times. And when he won that MVP, it's kind of a you can't tell me anything type of sequence where I am doing something that hadn't been done since the 1975 season. I had 60 triple doubles and 15 or 60 double doubles, 16 triple doubles. It's like these NBA players, particularly, what they respect just about as much as anything else on God's green earth is numbers and stats. And when Jokic accumulated the video game stats that he did, I think of the Jay-Z line, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. And for the rest of the league, it was like, wow, this is happening. And that season, you heard more people, more players go on the record than ever before and say, he's him. He's him. I look up and he's got 27, 14, and 11. Like, what direction can I go if you had a dissenting opinion on Jokic? So for all those reasons, man, that was a special all-time season, and I'm super lucky to have been here talking about it on the Fan.
I think it also opened up kind of, to my memory, it opened up a larger discourse that has continued since when it comes to advanced analytics and the weight that those should have. Because in that first MVP season, Nikola Jokic led the NBA in PER, player efficiency rating, value above replacement player or VORP, box plus minus, win shares, offensive win shares, a lot of stats that almost flirt into that Major League Baseball territory where you don't just on the surface of the acronym know what you're looking at or what you're talking about. But Jokic's dominance of these advanced analytics, I think, forced a further conversation about them and the weight that they should carry in player evaluations, be it for individual awards or what have you. Where do you come down on the usage and the dissecting of advanced analytics and how much weight they carry during these discussions?
I think they break ties. I think there's value in them. Almost you look at it as a tool in your tool belt of evaluation and less of a compass that every single time is going to point you in the right direction. But what made Jokic's case so overwhelming, and where I said there's nowhere else to turn from a dissenting opinion standpoint, and I remember saying this phrase over and over on the radio station, is that the raw numbers say it, the advanced numbers scream it. And when you looked at the on-off numbers, the net rating, and then in addition to everything that you just named there, it was not this guy's having the best season. Turned into to the analytics landscape, is this one of the greatest players that we've ever seen? That this is getting hard to quantify. It's making people uncomfortable because he's side by side to Michael Jordan's best season ever. And so it was one of these things where there was nowhere else to turn. It was some of the greatest stacking and accumulation of raw stats that we've ever seen. And then on the analytics side, we had never seen anything like it, where Richie, you could argue by the advanced numbers that we've just watched 5 of the 9 greatest basketball seasons of all time, with this season actually being the single greatest basketball season of all time. So it's been a fascinating run here for the Joker.
Yep. In closing here, Zach, because you kind of just alluded to it, I have always been fascinated by, and again, this goes to the discourse that came after this MVP season, was that there's no way they're going to give it to him again. And then he goes out after having one of the most statistical anomaly type seasons in NBA history. He then improves on all of those numbers in all of those same categories and has a more efficient, better, and more prolific season. And it's like, okay, he can't keep this pace up. He can't keep doing it. And he has continued to do so essentially every season for the last 6 seasons since winning this award. And we fast forward to this season, where, as you alluded to, he is reaching some of the highest peak of even his high bar of a career with all of these numbers. And yet it feels more and more likely that he is not going to win the MVP award in favor of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And we reference the straw polls and things of that nature to kind of gauge these conversations. Where do you fall on the line of, because I fall under the category of, I don't care how many years it happens. I want Nikola Jokic, who I think is the best basketball player in the world, to win the MVP every year. And I know that to a certain degree, championship rings and Larry O'Brien trophies mean more than individual awards from a team sense. And the first time he didn't win MVP after he started winning them, he won finals MVP. And I know that's kind of cute. Where do you fall on the importance for Jokic to win the MVP or continue winning it, and what it means for the trajectory of the franchise going forward as they continue to try to maximize this window?
Yeah, I think that it's at this point, because he already has 3 of them, it turns into for me, just how big of a footprint can this guy have in the history of NBA basketball? And you said something there. You said, I wanted him to win it every year, and of course we all do. But I would add on to that, I want him to win it, especially in the years where I think he deserves to win it.
Yes.
So when you talk about the first center ever to average a triple-double, just the 3rd player ever to average a triple-double for a 50-win team, like, holy smokes, we've never seen a player in the history of basketball be top 10 in points, rebounds, assists, and steals. And you're telling me Jokic, as of 48 hours ago, was top 3 in all 4 of those stats? They can give the MVP to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, just like the voters gave the MVP to Karl Malone in the late 90s as opposed to Michael Jordan. But I will tell you, history will frown on that decision. Even if in the moment there's fatigue and it feels like hey, this guy hasn't won one yet, so that'll break the tie, and he's the best player on the team with the best record. That's only in the West, by the way, not the league.
Right.
So it's like that's fine, and I'm not going to sit here and die on the hill. But at the same time, I will tell you, 20 years from now, if we ever see a season like that again, and the only comp is Jokic, and it's a year he didn't win the MVP, you won't be able to make heads and tails of it just because someone averaged 3 more points a game more than the Joker in that season.
I love it. Zach, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate all that you do for us here at the station. Love listening to you and Phil every day at 2 at 6, where a little birdie tells me there might be a special guest coming on a little later today. Do we have any fun guests lined up for today's show?
Yeah, we're going to talk with Colorado Athletic Director Rick George in an exclusive interview at 3:10. We'll play back some of it in the final hour as well, if folks aren't able to catch it. But really interesting following Deion's mega deal. Where are the expectations set? Is this actually a retool year after everything that they've lost? What's the future of NIL up in Boulder? He's now paid commensurate with the Ryan Days and the Dabo Sweeneys, but is there an avenue where the resources for CU can catch up with those other schools? So I think there's a lot of fun discussion to be had later this afternoon.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch. It'll be fascinating to hear what one of the men closest to Coach Prime throughout this entire process and who's chiefly responsible for a lot of the negotiations has to say about it. So myself, and I hope all of you out there, will be locked in at 3:10, and we'll be able to catch it again later in the 5 o'clock hour. Zach, thank you so much for joining us again today. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Richie. Appreciate it.
Cheers. To the rest of you out there, we are way over time, but I still want to try to get to a handful of your comments here because, as I expected, this was a polarizing show topics-wise, especially as it relates to the Denver Broncos. So, Trey, go ahead and start throwing them up there. I see it from Dylan and Alex and William. Go ahead and cue them up because I want to make sure that we get some opinions and feelings represented amongst Broncos country. I'm seeing from Dylan, if you move them out of Denver, then by definition, they are no longer the Denver Broncos. Dylan, baby, again, I went through the list of names, whether it's the Miami Gardens Dolphins or the East Rutherford Jets and Giants, the Inglewood Rams and Chargers. That is not how we, the collective NFL world, refer to them. That is not how, as Zach By liked to put it, history will remember them. It is not uncommon in any way for a team that is representative of a city to not play in that specific city. So I respect you. I appreciate the opinion. I just don't think you're on the ball on this one, because you can say by definition, but the definition has already been set by 10, 11 plus other teams around the NFL. What else we got, Trey? We want the team to be exposed to the elements. Alex, why? My question would be why, and you're free to follow it up in here if you can quickly, if you're still watching while we've got time. I don't understand the Broncos already play at altitude. That's already an inherent built-in advantage. So to be exposed to, we want the team to be exposed to the elements. Does that make it a better playing experience? I don't think that it's such a monumental tiebreaker that players in 2025 and beyond have never played in snow or cold weather at any points in their life. And again, a retractable roof, especially to the point that Zach made about some of the Bills renderings in Orchard Park, where you have the halo design, where the fans may be shielded. The people who are paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars to go to these games can have a more pleasurable or a better experience, and then the field can still get those same conditions if that is so important. I think there are more ways to meet in a common ground here than some people give it credit for. Yes, I love open air and natural grass. Hey, first of all, I don't have anything against natural grass. I think, and if you ask the players, I think they'd want to play on natural grass too, because of the litany of ACL and knee and lower body injuries that sometimes come when turf is not laid properly or it's exposed to different elements and things of that nature. But again, the open air, no one's trying to take that away necessarily, because with a retractable roof situation or an open face or the halo top design, we are not living in the Stone Age with some of these designs. There are, from an architectural and an engineering standpoint, ways to give most people almost everything that they want. And I think that open air with a retractable roof is very doable in this situation. I'll do whatever it takes to have my team stay where they at. But why though? Again, I just don't understand why. For a fan in Colorado Springs or Castle Rock or Parker or Centennial, they're already driving and commuting to Denver, where it seems like you are at, because that's where they are at. Why is that fair to them to have to commute to stay where they're at? But if the stadium gets moved to Aurora or Lone Tree, where those fans who get to experience the same thing that fans in Denver get to live in, why is that unfair to them? Or I don't understand, because people are going to go to where the team is. The Broncos are not going to lose attendance or lose fan base if they play out by DIA or in Aurora or in downtown Denver or in Lone Tree, because Broncos fans, by and large, are already commuting to have the stadium where it is. So it's just changing the slight direction on your Apple Maps of where to go. And if by doing that, you can build a better complex and better area customized around that stadium to provide more dining and entertainment and options around that, living options around that stadium, it's in a better environment altogether, and you can experience more than what we currently have. So, Alex, I appreciate the sentiment and the loyalty, and I know that there's always passion and emotions tied to these things. I just don't know that I think we're almost making it more of a deal than it is. Dylan says, you don't buy one of the biggest parts of the community to rip the heart and soul out of the community. It's okay. See, this is where we get with the emotional thing. I don't think it's ripping the heart and soul out of the community. This is already happening with so many other cities and NFL franchises that are beloved by their fan bases around the country, in some of the biggest markets in the country, bigger and with a higher population of a fan base than Denver. I don't see why moving the stadium 20 minutes in one direction or another is ripping the heart out of the community when it's providing a better fan experience, a better team and player experience for all involved. Because that's what we would be doing, in my opinion, at least. That's what it's set up to be on the surface. What else we got? Gosh, and I know, listen, I get it. I knew I brought this topic up on purpose because it's come up again recently with the ownership meetings, and I understand and I know the fire that it brings out of people. And I just find the discourse so fascinating from my opinion. Penner already said they are a long way off. What's long to you, Alex, or anyone out there? Because I will say this, action is spurred by development. And so it can just take one single approval, bylaw approval, a city council meeting, a handshake between two people who are very powerful involved in the process, and things can start to move very quickly. Because I promise you, and this is something Zach and I alluded to earlier, the wealthiest owner in the NFL and one of the richest owners in professional sports by a decent margin is not, by nature of a good business sense, going to continue to pay rent for a lesser product than what he can afford and provide than is necessary. And so I think that we've seen the speed and the steadfastness with which they've already made comments and commitments to break down and break ground on a new training facility over there at Dove Valley. The upgrades and improvements that they've made to the stadium in season, postseason, preseason, even if they probably could have just skated by and gotten by with the last couple of games without replacing and resodding all of the ground material in the stadium. A long way off, I think, is subjective, because I think 365 days is a long time, which means I think 700 and, whatever 2 years is. I can't believe I couldn't just do 365 times 2. That would be 700 and 350, 700 plus 30, 730. 730 days is even longer. But I would be stunned if we are not talking about progress being made and a start date being set within the next 5 years of this thing in the direction that it's going. That's not me reporting anything or sourcing anything. My gut tells me, because of the weight behind the people and the money that can be involved in this, with the groundbreaking nature of it, I don't think we're talking about this in the fans' 40th anniversary still being a conversation, if I can put it that way. I appreciate all of you so much for joining us. Love getting to your comments. Appreciated Zach By providing such great insight, as he always does, about our 9th milestone on our way to number 1. And we will continue the countdown tomorrow. I will catch you at the same time and the same place then.
I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the work.